Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for another study of Spiritism connection with transpersonal psychology, where we bring together the teaching of Allan Kardec and Joanna de Angelis. I'm Fabrício Assunção from the Spirit Society of Bournemouth in England. We welcome our speakers Mariane Macedo and Tiago Risotto from the Brazilian Spiritist Medical Association, who will talk to us tonight on reincarnation, unconsciousness, and forgetting the past. This theme refers to two Allan Kardec's books: the Spirit Book, Part 2, Chapter 6, Item 8, and Chapter 7, Item 8. And also the Gospel according to Spiritism, Chapter 5, Item 11, and Chapter 4, Items 18 to 23. Now, let me introduce our speakers. Mariane is a clinical psychologist, legal expert, and Jung analyst candidate. She works as a civil servant in the Superintendence of Penitentiary Service in Rio Grande do Sul. Mariane is a member of the Spiritist Medical Association of Rio Grande do Sul and a member of the Psychology and Spiritist Group of the Brazilian Spiritist Medical Association. Tiago is a researcher and is also a member of the Psychology and Spiritist Group of the Brazilian Spiritist Medical Association. He is a graduate from the University of Brasília and holds a specialization in analytical psychology from the Jungian Institute of Brasília. Tiago is a specialist in forensic psychology and has worked for many years with the juvenile offenders in the social educational system of the Federal District in Brazil. Our two speakers will give their talk in Portuguese, so we are honored to have Dr. Dan Assisi with us to provide simultaneous translation into English. Dan has a doctorate in education. He is a founding member of the Spiritist Institute in the United States. He's an author and gives many public talks on the spirituality and Spiritism internationally. So now I hand it over to Mariane, Tiago, and Dan for their talk on reincarnation, unconsciousness, and forgetting the past.
Olá, queridos. Com muita alegria que nós então iniciamos esse encontro.
Hello, friends. It's with a lot of joy that we start the meeting tonight, and we are very happy and excited to be together to talking about Allan Kardec and especially our spiritual benefactor, Joanna de Angelis. And I will pass the floor to my friend Tiago to also welcome himself, and then we'll continue on to the topic for tonight.
Olá, amigos queridos, amigas queridas.
Hello, dear friends. We have a very rich opportunity to study this very important topic: reincarnation, unconscious, forgetfulness of the past, and bring a spiritist perspective so that we may better understand how is it that the rules that govern life are present from the smallest part of nature to the larger, such as the movement of the galaxies. But first we have the soul that also regulate the psyche. So today we'll have a very special meeting, and I would love to count on you on this journey. So we are going to talk about reincarnation, unconscious, and forgetfulness of the past. And when we talked about reincarnation, we need to understand that's one of the principles of Spiritism. They are God, reincarnation, communicability of the spirits, and the plurality of existences. These principles are what underpin Spiritism. So reincarnation is something that helps us understand the evolution of the spirit. And it also allows us to understand divine justice, because it reminds us that God is a divine Father that's kind and just. It is only with the understanding of reincarnation and that it is a way of evolving, and that we are able to comprehend this dynamic of existence and dive deeper into the soul, as Tiago said.
De reencarnação. E nós chamamos, através de Hermínio Miranda, a gente fala.
And so through the author Hermínio Miranda, we talked about our reincarnatory project. Life is eternal, but the reincarnation is a project for our evolution in the current existence, and that all of us should be paying attention to for our reincarnatory project, so that we are able to understand what we are doing here, where we're coming from, why do we go through specific things, and where we're going. So to the extent that we understand the basic principles of Spiritism, it helps us also understand the works of Kardec and the psychological series of Joana de Angelis. And I'll pass it on to Tiago so that may he complement, and then we'll continue this dialogue. That's true, friend. Let's remember something, friends. The Spiritist proposal ruptures the veil and shows us the greater life, and shows us spiritual consequences related to our choices in our lives. It is as if you were a pearl necklace, were to symbolize the connection of incarnations that are connected to each other, that connect sort of a matrix of cause and effects, in which the past shows up in the present as an opportunity for reparation, for regeneration, and a commitment of love. For excellence, the law of love in relation to life shows us that when we are hurt, or when we hurt each other, be it in all kinds of relationships, social relationships, family relationships, collective relationships, there always will be the need for reparation. So reincarnation, it appears as a law alive that is necessary for us to be able to continue those relationships and the commitments we had, which we did not properly fulfill. If we look at the world today of nations and all the drama and challenges that we see in the entire globe every day, what do we see? We see a present which brings questions from our past and require their addressing in the present, with the purpose of making the future a better one, a just one, a kinder one. And in that sense, then, we think of reincarnation as a key element for the understanding of our current existence and our spiritual life. Our spiritual benefactor, Joana de Angelis, tells us that when we reincarnate, we open a range of possibilities. And what happens to this spiritual perspective? It shows us that when we come to physical life, we bring with us this baggage of experiences. But when we come here, we forget that. And the forgetfulness of the past is necessary. And why is it necessary? Because all of us are spirits who are in debt. And so this forgetfulness of this past is sort of a mercy of God, so that we don't feel humiliated, so that we don't feel guilty, because oftentimes we are not able to handle the depth of the challenges in our past. If we put that into context, we need to see people as historical context. And we'll see that centuries and centuries ago. Let's start, for instance, in the age of Christ. How many of us maybe were there claiming that we prefer Barabbas over the Christ? Or perhaps if we go to the Inquisition and all the other wars that we saw in the 20th century, and that the spirits say that was perhaps one of the bloodiest centuries in our history. And there were many wars, even though we had many different events that we mentioned were really painful. But we also must consider that humanity was a lot smaller than it is today on Earth. So as we look at this historical context, we notice that we were at one of these events, and maybe we were authors of many harmful practice towards others. And so forgetfulness of the past, it's the mercy of God towards us so that we don't feel guilty, humiliated, and that we may have a chance to begin a new journey from the beginning of this incarnation. And when we talk about the pathological processes, for instance, schizophrenia, and what does schizophrenia mean? Schizo, which means mind divided. So the schizophrenic is that spirit who has reincarnated here, and that they don't have the ability to look at the past because they really are dissociated. So if we're able to remember in this moment, look back, we may go into a pathological process for not being able to handle the experiences of the past that we have gone through. So the possibility of coming back in touch with that reality of what we've done in the past, it may help us develop a great sense of guilt, but it also can help us when we're a little bit more mature. But for that, spirituality will align us to that reality or not. And hence the importance for us to understand that these processes of regression end up deregulating some of us who may not be mature spiritually. To be able to remember the past, there must be a reason and a purpose that is much greater. So when we see a large number of alternative therapies that search just for curiosity to go back to previous lives, we can see how much disservice that pays to human beings because they are not meant for a greater purpose. And so human beings really are just allowed to access their past through the permission of spirituality, through dreams, or these processes that the greater spirituality organizes for us, or processes that are adequate, because perhaps they have a certain sense of a phobia. And I will share, for instance, a case that Dr. Alberto Almeida tells us, in which there is a child that was unable to go to a classroom, a school classroom, and it screamed every time that child was left there. And it was not just of the challenge of modern day life because they're afraid of being, left alone away from their mothers. They really went into a state of panic. And so they really was necessary to go back into this or into regression. They realized that this child had died during the war in an attack while they were in school. And from that moment of regression, it was possible to address that issue and begin treatment so that the child may be able to overcome this panic that he felt while in a school. And so we bring some of these examples so that we may illustrate how much responsibility we should have towards the forgetfulness of the past, which is really beneficial to us. But in some places, it might be helpful for us to pierce that veil with a greater purpose. And I will pass it to you, my friend.
Ok. Há algumas semanas eu ouvi o seguinte relato de
A,
um
a
amigo.
couple of weeks ago, I heard a
Tiago,
certain
já
story
não nos
from a friend.
falamos há muito
Tiago,
tempo
we haven't
e vou
spoken
te
in a while,
contar que sofri um
and I need
acidente
to
de
tell
carro
you
muito
that I
grave.
went through I had a car accident. It was a very
O
serious
carro
one.
ficou totalmente destruído
The
e
car was
graças a
completely
Deus
destroyed,
eu nada
and
sofri.
thank God I did
Tive
not
uma
suffer
pancada
a
na
thing.
cabeça,
I
mas
was
estou
hit in the head,
tratando,
but
mas
I
o
am
estado
seeing
que o carro
medical.
ficou,
I have medical
ninguém
accompaniment,
imaginaria que quem
but
estivesse
but in the
dirigindo
state that
tivesse
the car
levado
was
um tiro.
left, nobody can imagine that anybody would have
Essa amiga,
survived the
professora
accident.
de yoga,
This friend of
de
mine, who's
Brasília,
a teacher, a yoga
desenvolveu
teacher here in the city of
transtorno de
Brasilia,
estresse pós-traumático.
and she developed a
E ela
post-traumatic stress
precisou de
disorder,
acompanhamento psicológico,
and she needed some
e ela
psychological
acredita que a
support,
experiência foi
given
demasiadamente intensa.
that the experience
Não
was
foi nenhuma
extremely intense for
criança,
her.
uma mulher
She's a mature
madura
woman.
com uma vasta experiência no campo
This is a woman
terapêutico.
who has a vast experience in the
Mas
field
que
of
diante de uma
therapies,
circunstância de vida,
but before
decidiu
a hard
visitar de forma
circumstance of
inesperada
life,
por um acidente de
found
automóvel
herself
que ela
suffering
espera
this car
sofrer
accident
muitas vezes,
that
afastada
left
do
her
trabalho,
away
porque
from work for
ela
many
estava
months
traumatizada.
because she was
Então
truly
veja,
traumatized.
nossas
So,
experiências
see,
com uma
our
vida
experiences,
produtiva, acidente de carro,
sometimes
relacionamentos,
car accident
uma
or
doença inesperada
relationships,
que chega,
an unexpected illness that
todas
comes
essas
and knocks on our door,
ocorrências, elas
all these
tensionam,
occurrences,
elas alcançam o espírito no sentido de
they reach the
mobilizá-lo,
spirit in the
sensibilizá-lo e
sense
acessá-lo.
of impacting us and
Fatalmente,
sensitizing us.
somos seres sensíveis às emoções.
We are particularly
Então,
sensitive to
quando,
emotions.
e aqui numa metáfora, né? Quando
And so, as if we
esticamos
were to do
muito o
a
tecido do
metaphor,
espírito,
a
e
metaphor,
nós não temos condições de suportar essa
if we
experiência,
stretch the cloth of the spirit
imediatamente
very often
nós
and we don't have the ability to
manifestamos
withstand that, we
como
traumatize,
forma
we
de sobrevivência
we
psicológica.
dissociate as a way of
Quanto a
surviving
essa
psychologically.
experiência dessa amiga,
And as it relates to this
acredito que
experience
todos
from this
nós
friend,
que
I can
nessa
tell you
vida não
that all of us
tenhamos ou que
in
já
this life
tivemos
may
alguma
not have had or
experiência
perhaps
como essa,
or have
é bem
gone through these kind
possível,
of
como disse muito
experiences.
bem Mariane,
It is
que já
very possible, as
passamos por
Mariani said,
experiências muito
that we may
sombrias e
have
traumáticas
gone through very
em outras
traumatic
vidas.
ones in other lives.
Esses registros, né, não vão desaparecer quando
So
chegarem.
these occurrences, they don't
Aquilo que
disappear when we
aprendemos é
discarnate.
levado conosco na
Everything
intimidade do ser como
that
experiência
we learn,
espiritual.
it's sticking with us in
Então,
our intimacy
aquilo que ainda nos
of the
afeta,
spirit
mesmo
as
no
an
mundo
experience.
espiritual,
So that which
necessitará
affects us
tratamento e
even
cuidado,
in a spiritual
porque
world
nós
will
somos
demand
herdeiros
care and
do Lar.
treatment because we are
Faço
heirs
essa
of
pequena
ourselves.
introdução reflexiva
I
para
say that
pensarmos
as a
sobre a
way of introducing the
importância de
topic so
não
that we may
negarmos
think
o nosso passado espiritual.
importance of not remembering
Se
our
viver
spiritual
hoje
past.
já é difícil,
If living
cada
today
um
is
aqui tem
already
a sua
hard,
situação, seus
each one of us has
desafios,
their
suas
situations,
famílias,
their
suas
challenges, their
emoções,
families,
e às
their
vezes
loneliness.
os
But see,
desafios da vida presente em si,
the challenges
muitas
of
vezes já
current
são assim
life
dramáticos.
oftentimes are hard
Eles já
enough.
são, eles nos machucam, eles nos
They
ferem, eles
already
nos
hurt
testam.
us and test
Imagine
us enough.
se nós
Imagine then
acessássemos
if we were able to
involuntariamente,
access
se nos
involuntarily
fizéssemos
without
passar
us
por
wanting
ser
to
visitados mentalmente,
and began
ou
to be
fôssemos
mentally
inundados de
visited or
imagens,
perhaps were flooded with
aspectos e
images
experiências de um
and
passado
experiences from a
distante
past,
que
a distant
ainda
past,
dói.
that still
Então,
hurts.
há uma sabedoria na vida.
So there is a
Quando nós
greater wisdom
retornamos
in
ao nosso
life
corpo físico,
that when we return
nessa
to a physical
etapa
body,
inicial de estruturação do ego,
in
do
this
novo ego, do
time
novo
of
ser,
structuring a new ego, a new being,
esse material antigo,
this
arcaico,
old
às
content, this
vezes mesmo virtuoso,
old
pode
archives
ser
of the
muito
soul,
difícil
very
de
painful at
ser
times,
ativado em algum momento,
may be
como se dessem
filed
sermos
away
poupados
as a
de
way to
coisas maiores.
spare us from greater pains.
Entretanto, isso não é a regra, mas é
However,
apenas suas exceções.
this is the
Então,
rule,
tem
but
várias
it also has its
experiências,
exceptions.
e eu gosto de
There are
citar
many
o livro do Dr.
experiences,
Ian Stevenson,
and I like to
que ele
cite
pesquisa sobre
Dr. Ian
casos
Stevenson,
sugestivos de
who
medicação de crianças na Índia,
undertook
em que elas
tons of research in
espontaneamente,
the area,
de
writing many books,
recuperavam memórias,
inclusive 20
eram
cases
visitadas
of
por
suggestive
memórias de um
reincarnation, where he
professor
studies
aos
children.
8 anos e
And
dizia,
many
não,
children, 6,
eu
7 years of
lembro que eu
age,
fui o fulano de
would
tal,
remember that I
com
remember
esse
so and
nome,
so with this
morava em
name.
tal região
I
da
used to
Índia
live in this
e tinha tal
place
e tal
in
família.
India, and I had this family.
Diante dessas evidências, como pesquisador,
Before all
Stevenson
this
começou a
evidence,
investigar essas histórias
Stevenson began
e se deu
to
conta de uma coisa:
investigate
não é
these
possível
stories
que o
and
conjunto de
realized that it's not
informações dito por
possible
essas crianças
that the
possa ter
group
sido
of
revelado
information
por
shared by
elas
these
ou por
children
ser dito a
may be
elas.
found by them
Estamos falando de
or
regiões muito
be told to
remotas,
them because they were
nos
very
anos
remote
70,
areas in the
em que não
70s
existia o fluxo de
in
comunicação de
which
informações tão
communication was not as
fluido.
readily
E ele
available as we have
passou
today.
a defender a tese sim,
And he
a
began to defend the
reencarnação
thesis
é
that
uma verdade.
reincarnation
A
is a
reencarnação
truth.
se faz presente na vida. Mas
Reincarnation is
veja,
present in
essas
life.
crianças lembravam,
But
assim
these
como existem
children
várias histórias de
would
pessoas
remember
em quaisquer
much the same
idades
way that
que de
many
repente
other
têm a
human beings of all
manifestação
ages
dos seus
that may have
subconscientes
the
que
manifestation
trazem
of their unconscious that bring these
dados,
memories back up,
né?
that surface these
Mas via de regra,
rememberings.
nós esquecemos.
But as a rule
Agora,
of thumb, we forget.
Mariane, fazer uma pergunta, eu passo a bola para ti. Você acha,
Mariani, I'm going to
então,
ask you a
que
question.
esse esquecimento do
Do you
passado,
think that this
como que isso
forgetfulness
se
of the
relaciona,
past,
por exemplo, com o
how does that
inconsciente?
relate, for instance, to
A
our
gente pode fazer uma ponte entre a
unconscious?
ideia da
How can we make a
reencarnação,
bridge
de não
the idea of
lembrar do
reincarnation,
passado,
of not
mas ao
remembering the
mesmo tempo
past?
pensarmos como que
But at the
o
same time,
inconsciente funciona
how
e
does
como
our
que se
unconscious work
articula
and
nessa esse esquecimento, ele é de fato um esquecimento?
how there is
O que
this
você acha?
articulation about this forgetfulness?
Então, nós temos o inconsciente passado e o inconsciente atual, né?
So we have
Vamos
our past
pensar assim,
unconscious and the current unconscious. Let's try to think
se
about it
fosse
this
para eu
way.
perguntar para vocês
And if in
assim, o
this
que que
moment
vocês
I ask
tomam
you,
de café da manhã?
what did
O que
you
que vai acontecer?
had this morning
No
for
momento
coffee,
que
for
vocês
breakfast?
recebem a pergunta,
So the moment
todo
that
mundo vai parar e
you
vai
receive that
pensar,
question, everybody will stop and
vamos lá,
think
o que
and
que
try to
eu
remember.
tomei de café da manhã?
What did
Ah,
I
você
have
lembra, Tiago, o que que você tomou
this
de café da
morning?
manhã?
Do you
Ah,
remember,
não
Thiago, what you
lembro.
had this morning?
Mas no momento que eu estava
But
aqui,
in the
nós estávamos
moment
aqui conversando,
that,
ninguém
that we were
pensava no
talking,
café da manhã.
nobody was thinking
Mas
about
foi
breakfast.
acessado essa
But we
memória pelo
access this
inconsciente
memory,
atual, que
and
pode
this is
ser do
our
passado. Mas o
unconscious, a
nosso
current
inconsciente
unconscious that can be
passado,
accessed.
ele vai ser
But our
acessado
past
quando
unconsciousness
nós tivermos alguns
will be
gatilhos,
accessed
né?
when we have
Ele
certain
não está
triggers.
disponível para nós a todo tempo,
So it is
mas
not
ele está em
accessible
algum
to us at all
momento em
times, but
qualquer
it is
região.
there. And at
E
some
às
point, it can
vezes
be
são
accessed.
situações assim, ó, são experiências que a
And
gente
sometimes there are
acredita que já passou.
experiences
Por
that we
exemplo, quando
think
nós
that we have
estamos num
overcome. Like, for
lugar
instance,
que a
sometimes we
gente
have somebody we
do
don't
nada olha para
do
aquela
well with,
pessoa
and
e,
we look at
e
that
pensa assim,
person
ah, eu não gosto dessa
and
pessoa. Não que
think,
a pessoa
I
não
don't like
seja
this
legal,
person.
mas
But nothing happened.
está lá no teu inconsciente
But
passado
it's
e de
just
certa forma você
something in your
reconhece essa pessoa
unconscious in the past,
que você não tem
recognizing that maybe
identificação,
you don't
e
have an
pode ser
affinity with
nesses
that person.
registros, né?
It
Ainda
could be that in your
existem
archives,
experiências
there is an
anteriores,
experience
né?
from before.
Também situações às vezes que a gente ou você gosta muito de um país
There are also
e
situations
você
sometimes where you like a
quando
country
lembra
very
daquele
much,
você
or
já
you
acessa
listen to an anthem,
passado.
and some
Então
sort of memory
é
is
esse
accessed.
inconsciente
So there
que
is this
está ali,
unconscious
né,
that
registrado então nas
that is
nossas
registered
existências passadas.
in our previous
Ou seja,
existences.
ele está ali, mas ele precisa ser estimulado de alguma forma para que você tenha
So it is
consciência.
there, but it needs to
Mas
be
é
stimulated
importante
somehow
que
for
nós
it to surface.
enfatizar que
But it's always
ele
important
tem que
for
ter
us to
uma
highlight
finalidade, tem que existir um
that it has to
propósito.
have a certain
Mas existem
purpose.
sim algumas pessoas, e
But
aí
there
a gente
are,
tem
yes,
esse
some
tipo
people,
de evolução que é a mediunidade,
and we
que
have
essas
mediumship, for
pessoas têm
instance,
então
that as a
esse
way of
inconsciente
evolving.
mais
Some people have this unconscious, which are a little bit more open,
ampliado e elas conseguem sim
and
ter
they're able
acesso,
to have access
não exatamente quando elas querem, mas
not exactly when they want to,
com um auxílio espiritual, elas
but through
conseguem
some
ter
sort of
esse canal
spiritual
mais
help,
aberto e conseguem
they might be able
ter
to have
acesso a essas
an access
informações.
to
Mas
these
a gente precisa
informations.
estar lembrando da questão da
But we need to
utilidade dessa
remember
aula.
the
Nós
purpose
devemos
for that.
acessar, né, de forma
We
irresponsável, porque a
should
gente
not
sabe que
access
muitas vezes
these
as
memories
pessoas que têm
irresponsibly,
mediunidade, elas
because
têm acesso
oftentimes
a
some
essas
people
informações,
with
elas
mediumship,
passam
when they
para
have this
outras
information, they
pessoas.
pass it on
E
to other
muitas
people.
vezes
And
isso pode
sometimes
desencadear um adoecimento
this
daquele
can
que
trigger
recebe a
some
informação
sort
e não
of
está preparado. Mas a
challenge
gente
for somebody who
pode
gets that
fazer, né,
information without being
sondagem.
prepared.
Olha só,
Like a medium, for
tem
instance, who may
pessoas,
be
dois
very vain,
espíritos aí na tua
and I
volta.
see, oh, there's two
E
spirits
aí o
around you.
Tiago, né, que
And then
também tem todo
Tiago,
esse conhecimento, que tem esse
that has this
entendimento,
knowledge, that has this understanding,
tipo assim, mas não é novidade, nós temos os
and he
espíritos
says, well,
de
there's
guarda,
that's no news. I know that we
com
have
certeza tem.
spiritual guides. Maybe they're
E
here
como
with
diz
us.
o Edivaldo, eles esqueceram de
And as
contar
Divaldo would
os
say,
obsessores que eu tenho na volta,
they
né?
forgot to tell us
Ou
about the
seja,
spirits who perhaps have
nós
negative
estamos
influence
sim
over us.
rodeados, né, de espíritos,
Yes, we are
e
surrounded by
pessoas que têm
spirits.
então essa percepção, ela pode
And
sim
people who have this
a
perception
trazer a informação, mas a
may bring that
informação precisa
information,
ser
but it's important
identificada,
for
né?
this information may have some sort of utility.
E
Otherwise,
Tiago, assim, ó, tentando
it may cause
responder,
problems.
né?
And so, trying to answer your
A
question,
gente precisa,
yes,
né, fazer, ter
for
essa
sure,
noção
we
das
need to have this
características,
understanding
né, que é
to
da atual existência e
what
o
is
que é
it that belongs to our current
impermanente, né?
existence and what is
O
it that belongs to
próprio
previous
Evangelho,
existences.
ele nos fala, né, por
And
exemplo,
the
da
gospel
origem
tells us about
das
that
causas das
as well.
dores, que tem a ver também com isso que tu estava
The
falando,
cause of our afflictions,
né?
and that we're talking
Das
about
aflições, né? Quando a gente não encontra as
the cause of our afflictions. When we don't find
a gente
the
buscar
answer
nas
to our
existências
afflictions in
anteriores.
this
A gente
life, we
pode
should
buscar é porque realmente a gente
search in
tem
previous
respostas,
lives.
né?
And if we can do this, because we're able to access them.
Sim, querida, sim. Compartilhar com vocês uma história que foi contada a mim há muito tempo
Yes, my
por
friend.
uma
Let me
mãe
share with you a
com uma
story that was told to me a while
mediunidade
back.
bastante acentuada, uma família
A person
espírita.
with a
E
lot
ela
of a very
disse
developed
que antes do
mediumship, and
filho
this person said
primogênito, né, o primeiro filho
that
nascer,
before their
ela
first
estava na
child
casa
was
do
born,
espírito
she
que disse:
was
olha,
at a spiritist group, and it was told to
esse
her,
filho teu que vai chegar,
the
ele é
son who
muito
is about
sensível,
to be born, he's very sensitive, very
mas
smart,
ele vai ter uma grande prova nessa vida.
but he will have a
Você, como
significant
mãe,
challenge in this life,
tem
and
que
that
estar
you, as a
junto
mother,
dele para ajudá-lo.
need to be with him and
Não
help
foi
him.
dito mais nada.
And nothing else was
Aí
said.
ela, uma grande prova. O tempo passou, a criança
And time went by,
nasceu,
and
uma
child was
infância
born,
saudável.
a healthy
Aos 10 anos
childhood.
de idade,
At
já
about
com
10
outro
years of
irmão,
age,
segundo irmão já nascido,
already
brincavam
with a second
fora.
sibling,
Esse filho primeiro
this
para de brincar, deita
firstborn
na cama.
stops playing, lays
Fica
down in
lá.
bed, and just stays there.
A mãe vem,
The
pergunta:
mother come
fulano, o que houve?
and asks what happened.
Eu vou ficar assim, não vou? Assim como paralisado.
What
Eu
do you mean I'm
sei,
going to stay here?
eu
I'm going to
sei,
be
eu
paralyzed,
sei
won't
que vai
I?
chegar um momento em que eu não vou
I know
parar
that there is a
novamente.
moment in which I will
E
not be able
você
to
vai.
move anymore, and that my body will
A mãe
remain like
lembrou.
that. And the mother remembered.
E a criança era uma criança, começou a chorar. Ela foi,
And the child
abraçou
started to
ele.
cry, and she
Foram
hugged
necessários
him.
mais 8 anos de vida para que a
And another
esclerose
8
múltipla
years
manifestasse.
passed until the multiple sclerosis
Hoje,
developed.
passados talvez mais de 20 anos depois,
Perhaps 20
ela
years after
está no
that,
estado final, terminal,
they are in a
uma
terminal
doença,
state,
mas que é levada com uma coragem,
but that is
é
seen and
levada com uma
faced with such
fé,
courage,
na certeza de que essa
the
experiência
certainty that this
é fruto,
experience
depois veio-se a
is
saber, de um
uh,
suicídio
the result
praticado.
of a previous suicide. That's something
Ele
that was
havia
learned later.
pulado,
He
de um
had
penhasco,
jumped from a
e a primeira
cliff,
parte do corpo que foi atingida na queda
and the
foram as
first
pernas.
part that was hit
Justamente começou
during
a
that
parte
fall
do
was the
corpo
legs.
passou a manifestar os sintomas da
The
esclerose
first
múltipla.
part of the body that also started to manifest the
Então,
multiple sclerosis in this lifetime.
termos acesso à informação, como disse muito bem
So
a Mariane,
We have
sentimos
access to the
porque temos
information,
que ter
but
uma
there has
razão,
to be a reason.
temos que fazer alguma coisa com isso para
We need to do something with
compreendermos
it
o
to be
objetivo da
able to
vida,
comprehend the
por
objective of
caminhos e
life,
possibilidades que muitas vezes
for
nós
ways
não
and
temos todas
possibilities
as informações.
that sometimes we don't have all
E
the
aí vale
informations for.
pensar, do ponto de vista espírita,
It's important to
que
think
se nós
from a
estamos
spiritist
hoje
perspective
com uma
that
doença
if
como essa,
today we have
relações
a
familiares
congenital
difíceis,
disease or perhaps
filhos
difficult
difíceis,
relationships
companheiros
or
de
different
carreira
children or
complicados,
different companions,
mas ainda assim amamos as pessoas,
but we
amamos a
still
vida,
love them,
há um sentido.
then there's a
Esse
purpose.
sentido tem um fio que puxa o passado,
And this purpose
traz
probably
eventos
has something
significativos do
from the
nosso
past that has
passama,
significant moments from before,
mas nós temos uma proposta ética
but we have an ethical
espírita que nos pede
purpose
para
that
tentarmos
asks us
evoluir
to
mais.
be better.
Porque é possível, amigos, que se
Because
hoje
it is
estamos
possible, friends.
nos
And if
identificando,
today
conhecendo, nos tornando
we are
espíritas,
identifying ourselves or
nós
coming
passamos,
into contact with the spiritual
possivelmente,
knowledge,
por
it
outras
is very
experiências
possible
religiosas no campo
that we
cristão.
have passed through many
Talvez,
different other spiritist,
agora,
religious
no seu
experiences,
sentido mais profundo, filosófico,
and now, in a
compreendemos
deeper,
que
more
somos
philosophical
responsáveis
perspective,
pelos nossos
we
destinos.
begin to understand that we are responsible for our
Se
destinies.
nós desencarnamos com muitos problemas e
If we
não
discarnate
resolvidos,
with many
a
challenges
vida
and things that were
nos
left
dará a
unanswered,
oportunidade, em
life will
outra
give
vida,
us the chance
de
in another life
continuarmos a tentativa de
to
resolução.
continue to
Porque
solve
olha que
these issues.
interessante.
Because
Se em algum
think
momento
about
atrás
this.
nos
If
tornamos
some moments
inimigos
back
de
in
alguém,
history
ou
we
alguém
became
ou seja o
enemies
nosso
of
inimigo,
someone or somebody hates us
é
and
no
is
núcleo
our enemy,
familiar
it
que
is
a nova
possibly
vida
in the
e
family,
essa
in the new lifetime,
oportunidade se reencontram.
that these characters will
Temos
meet
aqui
again.
ódios entre irmãos,
We have
necessidades
hatred
de
between
pais e mães em
siblings. We
aceitarem
have challenges
que amam
between
mais um tipo do
parents
que a outro.
to
Isso é
accept
muito
that they loved
comum,
one
gera
son or daughter more than
frustração,
others, and they
sofrimento,
develop guilt. That's
mas
so
faz
common.
parte, são as afinidades.
But that's part of it. It's
Alguns
affinities.
sentimentos, temos inseguranças, temos
We have
antipatia,
insecurities, we have
e tudo
resentments, we have
isso faz
antipathies,
parte desse
and
conjunto
all
de
of that
experiências
is part of this collection of
transexistenciais.
experiences that are
Então, o
trans-existential, that they
inimigo
transcend one
é nosso
existence.
inimigo ferrenho,
So
chamamos
our
obsessor.
our enemy,
Esse
for
obsessor,
instance,
né?
or even our
Ele
spiritual
reaparece,
enemy, our
quem sabe
obsessor,
em uma
sometimes
vida a
they
gente
may
consiga
appear,
diluir esse
and
ódio
in one life we are able to
num nível de
dilute this
amor,
hatred through the
de
mechanisms of
perdão
love
na relação,
and through a
e o inimigo habita
forgiveness
com as
in a
pessoas.
relationship.
E esse inimigo se torna
And this
um
enemy may
colega,
become
alguém
a
que
colleague,
está
a
ali,
friend.
não ama, não
Maybe we
gosta.
don't love them
Na
supremely,
próxima vida,
but
esse
in the
que era
next
inimigo
life,
e virou uma
this
espécie
who is
de
enemy and has become sort of
gosto, não gosto,
an
se
acquaintance
torna
may
um
become
amigo.
a friend.
Aí na vida seguinte,
And then in the
esse
next
que era o
life,
inimigo e virou um
this who was the
familiar
enemy who became an
e depois virou um
acquaintance
amigo,
and then became a friend,
pode se tornar um amor de verdade.
maybe became somebody who we
Esses
truly
são
love.
os caminhos pelos quais
And
nós,
these are the
pela
ways
reencarnação, vamos
that we,
reconstituindo a
through
partir dos
reincarnation,
problemas e
we become to
desafios
restore things through our
possibilidades
challenges and
éticas
loves,
renovadoras
some
em
ethical
nossas vidas.
possibilities that are renewing for
Perceba a
us in many
profundidade das
lifetimes.
nossas responsabilidades diante da vida.
Look
Ah, mas eu
how
não lembro.
our
Tudo
responsibilities
bem,
are before
tem
the greater
material
life. Oh, I don't remember.
abundante aqui
Okay.
agora para você poder
You
trabalhar.
have tons
Então
of materials in the
aproveite.
current life to work with.
O que você acha,
So
Mariana?
make best use of that. What do you think, Mariana?
Estava escutando você, né? E a Joana de
I was
Ângeles
hearing
diz o
you,
seguinte:
and
a
Joanna de Angelis
família
tells
é
us that
a família é o laboratório de experiências.
family is the laboratory of
E ela
experiences.
fala mais. Ela fala que nessas
And she goes
experiências
beyond
da
and tells
família,
us that
que a
these
gente
experiences in
vai
family,
destruindo então o egoísmo, né?
that we slowly destroy
Egoísmo, né?
egoism
Então,
or
o ego
egoism.
destruído. Então, através dessas experiências
So
na
through
nossa
these
vida familiar,
experiences
a gente vai tendo a
in our
possibilidade
families, we'll
de
have the
agir diferente,
possibility
né?
to
Então,
act
ela
differently.
faz a seguinte assertiva, ela diz que o
And
começo da
she says
reencarnação
that the
é sempre
beginning
um
of
mar
our
de
incarnation,
possibilidades,
it's always an ocean of
balizadas ou
possibilities,
limitadas a diversas circunstâncias, e com
limited
facilidade
by many different
desfavorráveis a
possibilities,
outras
imposing
interpretações.
facilities or challenges, characteristics or illusions in that context. So if we reflect that context, that this soul restarts, they will identify a couple of things that are important. And sometimes it comes to light through family relationships. How many mothers blame themselves, perhaps for having more affinity with one child than the other? How many times do we lie to ourselves like, oh, I love people the same way? No, we can't love somebody who's hostile, who's judgmental, and while the other one who may not be the same, it's a lot easier to live with. And that's our internal reality. To the extent that we can understand that incarnation comes to allow us to improve and that we are imbued with our best feelings to be able to do these adjustments, to persevere, constancy in our relationships and in our actions, to have some sort of interaction with those who we don't like as much the same way we interact with those we love. And so this can influence our behavior. So these behaviors and resentments are oftentimes unknown up to when we understand that we're spirits and that we are immortal spirits and that we are in this incarnation, is that we are going to be able to make things a lot more clear. And so frequently, we need to understand that the spirit is reborn in a context in which she has already lived, and although there are new relations, we see that there is a previous commitment, and it is for this reparation of harm that was done in the past. So look how wise divine wisdom is. And when a mother embraces that cute baby, and there's lots of love there, but that could be somebody we did not get along in the past. And that is the wisdom of the divine that gives us reincarnation as a possibility for realignment. If the mother remembers or doesn't remember that person, they had challenges from the past, already in the process of taking care of the baby, of breastfeeding the baby, we begin to mitigate these challenges from the past because we already are more sensitive with the hosting of this new child. And to the extent that you start to build a new relationship with that spirit, you will build a history with them. And you see that even if you had a difficult past, dysfunctional past with that spirit, you have this tendency to build a new relation. And it's important for us to understand that even before the spirit reincarnates, there are many factors that can benefit or perhaps harm these relations. Some of the factors, for instance, perhaps being the firstborn in the family of the mother or the father, there's no grandchildren, and this is the first one of that couple, and it's going to be the first grandchild in the couple. Notice how much expectation there is in relation to that child. And if we don't have the spiritual sight of the spiritual evolution, they may cater to that kid so much that they may need a little bit more limits, and that family is not ready to give them the boundaries and the limits because they are the first baby, the first grandchild of the family, or perhaps the first male child after two girls, or the first girl after two boys in a family that maybe has many siblings of the same gender. Another situation could be if it was a planned or gestation or not. And so we will see all these circumstances. So we have all the past, that's in our conscious past. We have that, and we also have all these questions that relate to the current existence. And as Tiago said, sometimes we don't can't even handle the right now. So how can we handle the past? You've seen how much information goes into the process of reincarnation. And so, if we take the book Missionaries of Light by Andrea Lewis, for instance, we see the process of reincarnation of Sigismund. And this is always a story that we bring back when we talk about reincarnation. And we can see how much the spirits have worked with the father that had a challenge with the incoming baby to prepare them. So we have a lot of the spiritual processes that are important to consider and pay attention to. What do you think of all that?
Muito bom, muito bom, querida. Aqui é um ponto importante que é bom
An
que
important uh, an
com
important piece that's important to
o
highlight
advento da proposta espírita, né, em
with the
meados do
coming
século
of
XIX,
Spiritism around the 19th
a
century.
espiritualidade que governa o orbe, né, compreende
The
e define
spirituality, the spirits who
através
govern the
das
planet
centenas de reencarnações
and who
coletivas
help us
para que a
establish the
Terra, como
planning for
modelo,
collective
cresça
incarnations
coletivamente
so that
e
Earth
também
could
enviando
mature
sinais
collectively, also
alertadores.
send us missionaries in many
Ciência,
different fields,
arte, filosofia,
science,
religião
philosophy,
são almas
religion,
que
and so
trazem
forth.
conhecimento, experiência
These are souls that have come
que
to bring
impulsionam o
knowledge
conhecimento,
and
que
experiences and who
possibilitam
propel knowledge forward
possibilidades de fato
and that allow
compreensíveis.
that we may
Nesse
progress.
sentido, vamos pensar que
In
as
that
chamadas
sense,
escolas psicodinâmicas,
we can say that the psychodynamic
trazem
schools
na sua base a referência da presença do
that bring
inconsciente na vida
this
humana.
idea
Elas
of the
nascem
unconscious
apenas
present
no último
in
quarto
everyday
do
life,
XIX.
they only appear in the last
Surge a
quarter
proposta
of the 19th
espírita
century.
e é como se logo em seguida
Spiritism
esse
comes, and
empresário
right
diz: já
afterwards,
vamos
as if
lançar
the
as bases
spirituality says,
da
let's shake the
psicologia,
basis of
da
with things
psiquiatria
with
e das
psychology and
escolas
psychiatry,
psicodinâmicas para que a gente
with this
possa
psychodynamic
compreender,
school, so
poder
that
fazer as
we may,
conexões.
in time, make these
Amigos,
connections.
quando nós pensamos que nós
Friends,
esquecemos do passado,
when we think that we have
isso
forgotten the
tem um
past,
significado de que nós
this
não temos acesso às
has
memórias.
the idea that we don't have access to
Mas,
those
de alguma
memories.
forma, esse passado continua
But
presente
somehow,
e
this
atuando.
past is very present and acting on us.
Casos como
How?
esse, de
In a
que
case
Mariane
like that, in
utilizamos
which
como referência.
Mariani said, and that we
Às
also
vezes,
use
meus
as a
pais
reference,
detestam filhos.
sometimes a
E não há
father or a
explicação.
mother does not like
Às
their
vezes, uma
child and
mãe
they don't know how to
tem
explain.
tanto
Sometimes a
amor
mother
por um filho, uma
um,
espécie de algo que
has such
transcende a
a
afetividade.
connection that
Ela
goes
se vê
beyond
conectada com aquele espírito
regular affection and they
e
see
ela não
themselves
consegue
connected to that
amar.
spirit and she's not able to understand why.
Aproveito para citar um filme
I also take
intitulado
the opportunity to cite
Birth,
a
Nascimento,
movie called
de
Birth
2004, com
from
Nicole Kidman,
2014 with
que é
Nicole
sobre
Kidman
reencarnação.
that
Conta a
is
história de uma
about
mulher
reincarnation
que ela
and
reconstrói
tells
sua
the story
vida após a
of a
morte
woman
do
who
companheiro do marido dela.
rebuilds her
E
life after
10
the
anos
death of her
depois da morte do
companion, and 10
marido,
years
ela
later
passa a receber cartas, ela se casa de
she
novo
she gets
e ela
married again
ela começa a receber cartas de um menino de 10 anos de idade
and she
dizendo:
starts to receive letters from a
"Você é meu".
10-year-old saying, I'm your husband.
O que é interessante na trama é
What is
justamente esse
interesting in
duplo
that
objetivo de
drama is this
transcerrar
affective and affection
então
connection.
nas nossas interconexões
So
relacionais
in our
está
interconnections when it comes to
acontecendo muito mais
relationships,
coisa que a gente imagina.
there's a lot more happening
Nossos
than we imagine.
inconscientes estão se
Our
comunicando.
unconscious are
E
connecting,
nessa
friends.
intercomunicação
And in
espiritual,
this
o que está
intercommunications
presente
on a
onde?
spiritual level.
Sabia que isso
And where do we
faz
find
parte
that
dos
in the
livros
Spirit's
dos
book, by the way?
espíritos?
Do you know that they
Questão
speak about this?
386.
Question
Kardec perguntou aos seus
386,
discípulos:
Kardec asked spirits,
podem dois seres que se
can two
conheceram e
beings who
estimaram
knew
no
each other
passado
and
se
esteemed each other in the
encontrarem em outra
past
existência corporal
meet in
e
a
se
new
reconhecerem?
physical existence and recognize
Vamos
each
a
other?
isso.
And that's what
Nós
we're talking
esquecemos o
about.
passado.
We may
Pode
forget
se
the past,
reconhecer de alguma
but can
maneira?
we somehow
Não como
recognize each
formos
other?
espíritos,
And what do spirits respond?
Reconhecer e sim, não. Porém, que
Perhaps
sentem
not
atração um
recognized,
para o outro.
but they may feel attracted to
E
each other.
frequentemente, esta é a
And
causa e uma
frequently,
das ligações
this is the intimate
verdadeiras
cause of
internas
true
movidas por
connections
afetos
that
verdadeiros.
are that are moved by
Um,
true
dos
desire to
nossos
connect.
seres se aproxima em circunstâncias que parecem por acaso,
Perhaps
né?
somebody comes into your life
Eu
in
nasci no
ways that
Brasil
seems like a
no Brasil.
happenstance. I, for instance, my
Esposa,
friends,
né?
was born
Venho
in
de
the
uma
south
família
of
de
Brazil.
cariocas do
My
sudeste
wife
do Brasil.
was born in the
Olha que
southeast.
interessante. Como é que a gente se reencontra em
How
vida?
how do
Tá
we
aqui nessa
find each
resposta.
other?
Ele está dizendo,
This is the
circunstâncias
answer.
que parecem por
It is here in this
acaso,
answer. The
os meus
circumstances
seres
seen by
se
chance,
reaproximam,
they
porém
have
meus espíritos,
approached each other,
na
but the spirits
realidade,
continue. But in
é
truth,
fruto de uma atração entre os
it
dois
is the result
espíritos.
of
E olha que
attraction
forma
between these two
poética de encerrar a
spirits. And
resposta.
how poetically they
Eles
finish
buscam
and end this response.
reciprocamente, porém,
They seek
amostram.
reciprocally
Olha que bonito.
amidst the
Que leis
crowd.
são essas?
But
As
what
leis
laws are that?
fundamentais na psique.
The laws that
Os
govern the psyche.
inconscientes se comunicam.
The
Eu não
unconscious
sei
talk to
você,
each other. I don't know
mas às
about
vezes
you,
eu estou em casa
but
e
sometimes I'm at
tenho
home
histórias parecidas. Estou em
and
casa,
I have heard similar stories.
penso alguma
I'm at home,
coisa
I
e
think of
passa um
something,
segundo a minha esposa diz
a
assim:
second goes
já
by,
pensou
and
que
my
você fez
wife
tal
says,
coisa agora?
do
Você
you
sabia
remember
que
such
eu
thing, this and this, that
percebi?
you had to do?
Ela
And I say, oh
está
my goodness,
se
she
comunicando
is
comigo,
connecting
não
to
pela
me,
linguagem, mas pela
not through
psique.
language, but through the psyche.
Isso então, amigos, tem a
That, my
ver
friends,
com essas
has
dimensões
to do
anteriores,
with these
experiências
previous
que nos
dimensions
interconectam. Agora,
that connect us to each other.
nós não temos então acesso à memória. Nós não
So we don't
podemos
have access to that
lembrar, nós não
memory at
temos a
chance, but at
lembrança.
times.
Mas como que isso aparece então?
But how does that show up? Through our
Pelos
emotions,
nossos
our
sentimentos.
affections, our
O que a gente
feelings,
sente de atração ou de repulsa
what we feel of
dá um
attraction or
tom, uma
repulsion, give
tonalidade
us a
do
certain
que é
tone
essa memória não acessada.
to this
Então,
what it is that
evitar,
this memory that we have
evitar
of not
histórias
liking
terríveis,
of or
muitas vezes
wanting to harm
trágicas que a
others
gente
because
conhece,
there are tragic
de almas
stories
que
that we
parecem
know
se reencontraram
of
por
souls that
paixão,
seem to
simplesmente por um afeto, e de repente, quando se
find
veem
each other through
juntos,
affection, but when they find
simplesmente
themselves together
enlouquecem.
again,
Né? Existem problemas muito graves. Né?
we
Em
see many
casos como
problems.
esse, no sentido ético, às vezes é necessário
In
proteger
cases like this, like an
esses
ethical
irmãos
sense, it's important for us to protect
que continuem vivendo.
those who are being harmed.
Então, nós temos ali,
So,
neste movimento de almas,
so we
nós
have
esquecemos
in
do
this movement of
passado,
souls in which we forget the past,
psicodramaticamente ainda nós somos
psychodynamically,
afetados
we're
por
still
esses
affected or
registros,
impacted
por essas
to these
memórias,
archives, to
por
these
esses registros
memories, to
que
this psychic
atuam
content that
emocionalmente,
act upon us
afetivamente em nós.
emotionally and
Sabe quando nós
affectionately
nos
in
sentimos
us.
inseguros?
Do you know when we feel very
Talvez assim,
insecure?
eu não consigo entender, desde pequenininho
Maybe
eu me sinto muito
we say,
inseguro,
I don't know
eu
why, ever
sou
since I was a child, I feel
temeroso.
very insecure, I
Enquanto
cry
esse
a lot.
irmão se
Meanwhile,
desenvolvendo mais
the
seguro,
brother is growing more, with more confidence.
espiritual.
Maybe
Então
that's
essas
to do with our
impressões,
spiritual past.
dependendo
So
da
these
condição
impressions,
espiritual que se encontra o espírito na sua evolução, vai
depending on the
sendo
position that we
mais
find ourselves
afetado ou
in
não
our
por essas
evolution,
impressões.
may lead us to
Porque,
feel
amigos,
more or less
se nós
affected by
não
these
resolvemos uma
impressions.
questão,
Because if we have
imagine
not
nessa vida, eu não
solved the
consegui
question from
resolver
the
uma questão
past,
com meu pai.
imagine, for instance, in this
E
life that I'm not able
ele
to overcome a
desencarnou,
challenge with my father and he
conversamos por
discarnates.
alguns anos, nós
We
rompemos,
fought,
hoje me sinto muito mal, sou
and now I
espírita,
feel bad.
sei que
I'm a
nós vamos ter que
spiritist,
viver
and
de
I
novo.
know that we are
Quando eu
going to have to
desencarnar,
figure
eu
this
vou
out
encontrar
again.
com ele.
And when I discarnate, maybe I will
Não
meet
quer
him.
dizer que encontrar
It does
alguém
not
no plano
mean
espiritual pós-vida
that finding somebody in the
necessariamente vai
spirit realm
resolver.
afterlife will
Tem
necessarily
que ver
fix
o que vai
things.
acontecer.
We have to
E aí,
see
às
what's going to
vezes,
happen.
como o caso da personagem Silas, da
And
obra
as the
Ação e
case
Reação,
of the character Silas in the
ele
work
brinca
Action and
assim:
Reaction by Andrew
o
Lewis,
núcleo que tem que
it
reencarnar
says,
sou eu, o pai, a mãe
and the
e a
nucleus of my
segunda forma de
reincarnation will
pai.
be my father,
Eu fui causa
my
da
mom, and
morte
the
do pai.
second
Só que tem um
wife of my
problema.
father, who I caused the
Nós
death
não
of.
estamos conseguindo
But
encontrar
there's a
ela.
problem. But we can't
Ela está
find her.
desencarnada.
She's
infelizmente,
discarnate.
algumas
She is in deep
distorções
suffering
dela
in some
e
place in the
as
spiritual
lutas
realm,
continuam.
and the
E
searches
sem a
continue.
presença dela,
And
nós
without her
deixamos esse
presence,
núcleo de almas,
so that we
a
may
gente não pode
complete
voltar.
this nuclei
Não tem
of
jeito de
souls, we
voltar.
cannot go
Mas
back.
veja, o compromisso das almas ele é
So the
elaborado de uma
commitment of
forma
souls
em que
is created in such a
ele tem
way
um sentido mais profundo.
that it
No
has to have a
caso,
deeper meaning.
esta que foi a madrasta desse espírito
In this
Silas
particular case, the
vai voltar
stepmother
como uma
of
irmã
this
mais
spirit,
nova. Então ela
Silas, will come
responsabiliza
as a
mais ela.
younger daughter.
Ele vai encarnar como mais velho,
He's
vai ter uma
gonna
irmã mais nova com
he
problemas,
will he will
e
reincarnate,
depois esse
and he will
ciclo
have
repetitivo,
a
e de
sister
novo
that's
um
a younger
ciclo encerra
sister,
com nova
and they would
encarnação.
have to work
E aí,
together.
amigos, o que que acontece?
And what happens?
Nós não sabemos,
We
não
don't
foi
know.
contado.
We are
O que
not
a gente
told.
sabe da nossa experiência?
But what do we
Que
know
cada
through
um
our
de nós aqui,
experience?
com as suas
That each one
experiências de
of
vida,
us, with our
está
own life
vivendo
experiences, is
em
living
condições e em
in conditions
possibilidades
and
que estão
possibilities
relacionadas a esse
that are
passado.
related to this
Então,
past.
encarnada da vida, que a gente aproveite as oportunidades.
So may
Concorda,
we
Mariane?
enjoy these opportunities we're presented with. What do you think, Mariane?
Tiago, querido. Gente,
Dear
deixa eu
Tiago,
contar uma coisa para vocês.
let me tell you
A coisa
something,
mais
people.
amada do mundo é a afinidade dele e da Luzinha, né?
It's the best thing in the world to see his affinity with his
Eles
wife.
comunicam realmente
They really
telepaticamente,
do talk
simultaneamente.
telepathically. It's just a beautiful
Então,
couple.
olha só, Tiago,
But
quando tu estava
anyways,
falando,
but
né?
Tiago, as you
Eu
were
lembrei assim
speaking,
de uma frase da Joana, né?
I remember a
Que
sentence that I read
ela
from
fala
Joanna
dos
in
motivos
which
para
she
se ter essa
says
experiência, essa vivência do bem, né?
that
Lembrei e agora esqueci.
I remember now, I forgot that, but it's going to come back to me soon.
Aquele que ajuda a enxugar as lágrimas não tem
Those who
tempo para
help
chorar,
to
tá?
dry the
Então,
tears
aqui
of others
falando
don't have
dessa
time
prática
to
do
cry
bem que o
themselves.
Tiago nos
And
traz,
so, talking about
quando
this
nós
practice
temos
of
essa
goodness
consciência da
that Tiago
imortalidade
brought
da
to us,
alma, né?
when we have this awareness of the immortality of the
Capazes de
soul
nós
and
fazermos um
understand
bom uso do nosso
the
livre-arbítrio,
importance of using of our free
né?
will and make the
E
best
termos
possible
equilíbrio no nosso
choices
dia a
and
dia,
have
né?
the
Tudo aquilo que nos for,
lucidity to make
nós
good
vamos trazer as
choices,
consequências
and that
disso.
everything that we
A gente
choose we were going to
passa
be
então a viver
responsible
uma
for,
existência com mais
we
responsabilidade.
then have
E
an
aí
existence with more
entender
responsibility
que esse processo ele
and
é
understand
desafiador,
that
porque
this process is
todos os
challenging
dias nós
because every
passamos por
day
experiências
we go through these
aonde nós somos
experiences
colocados à prova. Quando
where
nós
we are
temos esse
tested.
ego muito exacerbado,
When we
é
have
bem
this
difícil a gente receber
very developed
críticas, né?
ego,
Fica
it's
bem
very hard
difícil
for
da
us to
gente
take
ouvir que a gente
criticism.
não é 100%.
It is hard for us
Quando a
to
gente
hear that
passa
we're
por esse
not
trabalho,
100%
quando
great.
alguém aponta
When
alguma
somebody does not like the
imperfeição,
work we do or they
não há
highlight some of our
ninguém
shortcomings,
mais que aponte e que bote o dedo na nossa ferida
and
do que
there's
nossa
no
família,
one
filhos
who
principalmente.
who point to our
Ou
shortcomings
seja,
more than our
e é muito
family, right? Or our
engraçado
children
porque assim, ó,
specifically. So it's really
nas
interesting
salas, né, de adolescência, a gente vê
that,
assim,
many
comportamentos
teenagers,
assim
and we hear a lot
bem
of
extremos, né?
in our
E
clinic,
as mães dizendo
we hear a lot of
assim,
these pearls, and the mothers say,
ele disse assim, olha, eu te conheço desde que eu
and
nasci,
he
desde
says,
que eu
I
tinha
know you since
7
I
anos,
was
né?
born. I was know
Então,
you
assim,
since you were, for
essa
17
mãe
years
que
of
é
age.
espírita
And this mother who
via
may
ali
be a
apontando, ó, te
spiritist
conheço há 17 anos, né? Ou
and
seja,
may be pointing
pode
and
ser
say,
que
I know
seja
you
de
for
uma consciência
17
mais
years,
evoluída,
but,
né?
but you may be kind in the spiritual group, but
E
not
isso
here at
não
home.
é essa nossa realidade espiritual.
And so that
E é
sometimes
importante
goes
nós entendermos, né?
in contrast to our
Essa
experience.
imperfeição e
And so
aceitá-la.
it's important for us to
Que
understand
é
our
uma
imperfections
construção que todos os
and
dias
understand that
nós
is a
somos
construction
testados, né? E
upon which we're tested
desafiados
every
numa
day
mudança
and
comportamental.
challenged to
Então, quando a
change
gente
every day.
assimila isso e se compromete
When we
consigo mesmo,
absorb that
a
and
gente vai
commit to
ver que,
ourselves
olha, 5
for
anos atrás,
improvement,
talvez,
we see
alguém
that maybe
dissesse
5 years
algo
ago, if
e
somebody gave me
eu entraria em
feedback or
revolta,
criticism,
dizia, não,
I
critica, mas
would
já conseguiu
be
entender que realmente
hurt.
isso
But
foi
nowadays, I
porque
feel
houve um
like really that is a
crescimento
shortcoming
significativo,
and that I'm
aprendendo
here to
essa
improve
lição,
myself
que isso
and
não
that I
é
need to get
pessoal,
better
né?
and
De que
connect to
Deus está
this
trazendo
teenager who can
também
see my
a nossa
shortcomings
realidade espiritual para o âmbito
and to
familiar,
also bring
mas
the
que é tempo
spiritual
de nós
experience to our homes.
compartilharmos, né, desse conhecimento e buscarmos então
Importance for us to
ferramentas
share
de
that
cura, né?
understanding and look for the tools that Spiritism offers, like, for instance, doing some gospel at home, and how prayer, meditation, and tools and that we have at our disposal that may allow harmony at home. And Joanna de Angelis tells us that we are relational beings. And so if we understand that, we need to have the clarity that if we are a relational being, our communication has to be a dialogue. That is, I speak and they hear, and then they speak and I hear. But when I don't have that understanding, what's going to happen? We are going to think that only our thought way of thinking is right, and that others have to act like we think they should. And if something is obvious to them, they need to be obvious for somebody else. And we end up being disrespectful to those who are around us in this journey. So there is a book that says our children are also spirits. And when we understand that our children are also spirits, and they've also come to evolve, and that we're committed to their evolutionary process, but we don't try to standardize our children and recognize them for their individuality. To the extent that it becomes clear, we understand that we can handle life with a lot more love, respecting the evolutionary process of each one, but doing it with a clarity of thought that is given to us. So evolution will take place when we change our behavior. And Joanna says that, a rolling stone grows no moss. That means we need movement, attitude change. It's not enough for us to have new results with old behaviors. If we behave the same way within our spiritus group, especially with our groups, especially our familiar groups, we will have the same answers. The moment that I start to talk to my children in a violent and aggressive way, they will for sure perpetuate that behavior wherever they go. And we will not be able to have this relationship of dialogues as Joanna recommends. And our relations begin to be heavier, more difficult relationships without behavior changes. When we begin to understand that and have a certain sense of lucidity, we'll begin to take responsibility. Where I'm coming from, what am I doing here, and where I'm going. And so we know that we are spirits in an evolutionary process. And so what are we doing here? We're here in this reincarnation so that we may be able to handle this dysfunctional past we've had, and that we should make use of this incarnation so that we can change ourselves and realign ourselves with those who are on this journey. And there is a sentence that I love. It says, those people who shoulder life with us. And what is to shoulder life with us? Shoulder to shoulder, they're with us. And who are the people who face our life shoulder to shoulder? Our parents, our children, our co-workers, our colleagues, our spiritual friends. Is to walk together, is to be together. That is, it's a relational relationship. Understanding that you're not more or less, but that you are someone who is trying to overcome not others, but yourself. And where are we going? That's a matter of choice. We are going to go to a place where we are building this reality in this previous existence. And we hope that all of us may be able to go to this regenerated world and to this renewed world. But for that, we're going to have to change our behavior significantly. And I pass that back to you, my friend.
Existe conceito, amigos, né, na área analítica.
There is a concept in the analytical field, friend, which is the idea of repetition.
Muitas vezes, psicologicamente, Vamos
since we
desenvolver
oftentimes, from a
talentos
psychological
para fazer
perspective,
repetições
will develop some sense of
desorganizadamente
compulsion to certain repetitions,
relacionadas com alguma questão em nós
but they
pessoas,
might be related to
pessoas
something
maiores.
deeper that has not been
Por quê?
addressed. Why do I say
Porque
about
imagina
repetition?
os espíritos
Because the spirit Joanna
induzindo
the
nós
Angelus tells us
tendemos a repetir as nossas condutas, amigos,
that we
através
tend
dos
to repeat
sonhos,
our behaviors, that our inheritance from the
porque
past.
nós investimos nossa vida em certas condutas, em certas
When we
ideias, em
invest part of our
certas
lives in these
ideias,
behaviors and values and
e
ideas
realmente acreditar que isso é verdade,
and begin to believe that they're true,
e nós desencarnamos percebemos que aquilo não é verdade,
and when we discard it, we understand that's
a
not
gente se
true,
surpreende com o quê?
we are
De
surprised
termos
by what?
inscrito, de termos semeado dentro
That
de
we have
nós
written, that we have sold within
condicionamentos,
ourselves
ideias
conditioning,
e valores
ideas, and
que não vão
values
embora, né, de
that
forma
don't go
instantânea.
away quickly.
Eles precisarão de tempo.
That we need time.
Então, se alguém passar a vida inteira acreditando que a
If
coisa
people
mais
go their entire
importante é
life
ter um corpo
that the most
perfeito,
important piece is to have a
se
perfect
alguém
body,
acreditar que a vida é para
if they
comer,
believe
beber
the life
e
was
fazer
meant for
sexo,
drinking, eating, and having
ok,
sex,
é a verdade
okay,
da pessoa.
that is their truth.
Mas essas são verdades transitórias,
But these are
não são
transitory
verdades
truths.
absolutas.
They're not
E isso tem um
absolute
preço.
truths. And that will
Se
have a
alguém já passa a
price.
vida inteira ferindo os
If
outros,
somebody goes through their entire lives
alguém que
hurting other people,
não se dispõe a se relacionar de forma saudável com as
somebody
pessoas,
who's not willing to relate
pessoas que
healthily with
cometem
others,
crimes,
people who commit crimes,
nós vamos como se tatuando
we
na
sort of
vida
go
alma
tattoo
todas essas
ourselves in the
experiências que vão nos
in our
convidar a
souls all
viver
these
o que a
experiences,
gente busca,
and that will
formas de
lead us to
realização.
search ways in which we
E
can
nós tendemos,
um,
amigos, a repetir.
repair what we've
Quem
done.
nós fomos em termos de
And we have a
personalidade em outras
tendency to
vidas,
repeat
se fomos
who we were
se nós
in terms of
identificamos uma
personality in previous
origem muito
lives.
forte para nós,
If existence was
nós às vezes não
very
temos
strong,
saída,
powerful for
não
us,
conseguimos nos
very negative,
libertar.
and we're not able to
Acabamos
disconnect from that,
reencarnando de novo, às vezes
as
em
we
outra cultura, em
reincarnate
outra
again,
terra,
perhaps in a different
identificamos uma
culture, in a
vida para
different
uma certa
country, a different social
tendência,
status, but it is as if this
condicionamento
tendency, this
que nos
conditioning,
direcionasse a
uh,
fazer de novo igual.
pushed us to do the same
Então,
again.
se nós olharmos hoje, quais são as nossas
So
tendências mais
if we look at our
íntimas,
tendencies today at the deepest
vamos
level,
regir o nosso desejo, né,
and what our
com mais
desire
leveza,
rotates
com
around, we
mais
have a better
facilidade.
sense who we
Aí
were
está
in
o
the past.
desafio, o núcleo
And
central
therein
da
lies the
questão
challenge,
que nós
the
precisamos responder.
central part of the
Se for para
questions.
repetir, amigos,
Because if it's
imaginem,
about repeating,
se for para termos vidas ordinárias,
if it's for us to have ordinary lives repeated over and
onde
over
nós
again,
não nos destacamos no
in which
sentido
we
positivo de sermos
don't
agraciados,
learn,
nos
we don't
sensibilizarmos, compreender mais,
improve ourselves and
nós
understand each other
repetimos
better,
experiências
then
que
we're
são
just
frustrantes.
repeating experiences and
Então,
failing and progressing forward.
nós precisamos de muito trabalho,
So we
precisamos
need
de
a lot
muito
of
esforço
work, a lot of
para que a
effort,
gente possa encontrar uma nova forma de viver,
so we can find new
uma
ways
nova
of
forma
living,
de sentir, uma nova forma de
a new
existir,
way of
uma nova
feeling, and a
forma
way
de
of
amar.
existing, of
Então,
loving.
se o amor coroa a
So
vida,
if
se o
love
amor é a
crowns
coroação mais
life with a
profunda de
consecration
existir,
of what's deepest to
onde
exist,
está o meu amar?
then maybe there's a key that we can
Onde
use to
está o meu
open our soul
cuidado?
up. And how is my
Como é o
loving? How is
autocuidado?
my caring? How is my self caring?
São perguntas essenciais e que
These are
estruturam a vida.
essential questions
Então,
that structure life.
toda vez que você
So, my
consolar
friends,
alguém,
every time
toda vez que
that you
você
console
cuidar de
someone,
alguém,
every time
toda
that you
vez que
take
você
care of
vê
someone,
as múltiplas faces do amor na experiência da
every
vida,
time that you
você está
exercise the multiple
escrevendo
faces of
uma
love in
tinta em
life,
nós, né, conhecida da alma.
you are
E essa
writing with a
nova
very
forma de
bright
experiência de vida
ink
vai
this
nos
new
dando
experiences.
possibilidades de
And
enxergarmos melhor,
this new
de
experience
vermos
has
mais
a way of
e
giving
de
us a new perspective
compreendermos
of
mais
living
a
better
amplitude que
and
acompanha
to
nossa
comprehend
vida.
life in a
Por
way, in
isso
a more
passa
ample way,
por experiências
which
que
is
nos fazem
broader than
refletir
before.
questões
And
muito bom, né?
that
Seria mais
will lead
profundo.
us to experiences that made us
Isso
feel
pode
deeply,
favorecer o nosso
that
amadurecimento.
may really benefit our own
Pode
maturing.
pensar nisso,
So
né?
let's think
Tem
about
mais
that.
perguntas?
I just want to continue on something that you brought forth, Thiago.
Posso continuar?
May I?
Pessoal, o Tiago falou ali a respeito da
Friends,
repetição das
Thiago
experiências.
talked about repetition of
Quem
experiences.
trabalha em reunião mediúnica tem a
Those
oportunidade
who have a
de
chance to being part of
escutar alguns
mediumistic work,
depoimentos, né?
you may have a chance to hear some
E às
testimonials
vezes,
from
quando
spirits.
vem espírito obsessor,
And sometimes when there are some
alguns
obsessing spirits,
espíritos chegam nas
they
reuniões
have a couple of
dizendo para a
speeches
gente assim, ó,
and come to our meeting
você
saying the
achou que eu
following:
não iria te encontrar agora
You
que
think
você
I was
está
not going to
fazendo
find
o
you
estudo?
just because now you're wearing a
Pode ser que
dress?
aquele médium seria um
And
homem
so the medium, for
e
instance, could have been a man in
percebemos
the previous
através
life.
das
You think you were
reuniões
hiding in this
como é que o
dress,
espírito
but I
obsessor
found you.
encontrou aquele
How
médium
do this obsessing
pela
spirit
repetição da
has
conversa.
found the medium through
Então,
the
olha
repetitive
que
behavior?
interessante, gente. Se os nossos
See the importance of
obsessores nos
that.
encontram
If our
pela
spiritual obsessors,
repetição do
those who
encontramento, a gente não pode
want to
deixar
have
de
negative
confirmar
influence
essa
upon
coisa.
us,
É o convite
see us by our
que
behavior,
realmente tem uma
then
mudança
maybe we should
radical
really try to
na
change our
postura.
behavior.
Porque olha só, se você vai
Why?
ser encontrado pelo
If you're going to
obsessor
be
no
found
encontramento, quer
by
dizer,
your obsessing
vamos
spirit through your
voltar ao que nós
behavior, what
falávamos
does that
antes
mean? Let's
da
go back to what
reencarnação,
we
né?
talked about before.
Históricos, né?
We are
Contextualizando toda essa história,
historical
nós
beings,
estivemos nessas realidades, né?
and we
Então,
were in
daqui a
these different
pouco,
realities, and
a
soon
gente vai ser
enough,
aquelas pessoas responsáveis, sei lá,
will be those people who
por
are
colocar
maybe
as pessoas lá no circo, né? E
um,
aí, daqui a
those
pouco,
who
de
led people
lá
to
de
other
lá, a
difficult
gente não está
behaviors,
colocando mais as
different
pessoas lá
situations,
no circo,
and we might
brincando
not
com
be
elas,
sending them into
mas a
different
gente está
situations
colocando as
anymore,
pessoas no
but we
circo,
are,
virtual,
but we're
aonde a
doing
gente
that
fala, a gente
virtually.
critica os outros nas redes
Maybe we
sociais,
criticize others in our social media.
fazemos cyberbullying,
Maybe we practice
a gente se
cyberbullying,
vinga falando
where we
mal nas redes
revenge
sociais, né?
and
Então,
avenge
assim,
yourself and
não
through
estamos
social
mais nesse
media.
ciclo, mas
And
estamos em
so
outro ciclo, estamos
maybe we don't
numa
have those
não existe
forums
mais
in which
essa
we
vingança.
made it
Não
hard for
existe
people
esse
before,
comportamento
but now we
mais
still do that in different
agressivo.
ways. There's still the behavior of
Então a gente precisa
aggressiveness
entender assim que o
within us.
contexto
So
ele
we need to
modificou,
understand
mas
that the
nós que
context may have
evoluímos, nós
changed,
não
but our
podemos mais
behavior, our
agir
behavior
de uma certa
standard
forma. Talvez tenha o
manifests
mesmo
in different ways.
gatilho da
They may
agressão, da
have the same
violência, da
triggers and the
prática do
violence,
bem e mal, né?
the
E
practice
nós
of
reconhecermos
evil or harm others.
essa
And so we need to
vulnerabilidade que ainda está presente
understand
em
this
nós.
lower
E
side of us
voltar
that's still
no,
present.
no André Luiz, a
If we
gente
go
vai
back to
falar um
Andrew
pouco
Lewis, for
sobre os
instance,
portais, ou então sobre o cérebro triune, né?
we might talk about our mental houses or
O cérebro reptiliano, depois o
our
cérebro
three brains, the reptilian
consciente, depois
brain and our
o
limbic brain, and only later the
essa
neocortex, these different
nós
levels of our brain.
a gente se comporta,
But
né?
we behave,
Teoricamente, embora nós tenhamos o neocórtex, né?
even though we
Que
have the neocortex,
juntas que estão
where
ali
we
no
have our
nosso
executive functions that are at
funcionamento da
disposal
aquela
through our
energia,
thoughts, through
nós
planning.
ainda quando nós somos instigados
When we are
por
instigated
críticas, a gente
and somebody
acessa
criticizes, we
esse
still
cérebro triune,
access
e é quando a
this
gente dá
reptilian
aquele
brain.
grito ou
And that is we
aquela
scream back or
resposta
we
muito reativa.
reply very
Então,
reactively to others. It's
nós
still
temos
that
que
lower
nos
side of us,
organizar
to
para
our animal
isso,
side, so
que à
to speak.
medida que a gente
And we
vai
have to be aware of
evoluindo,
that.
que a gente vai
And to the extent that
melhorando,
we
a gente
evolve,
acessa menos o
we
reptiliano e
access
passa a
less the
acessar mais o
reptilian side
neocórtex.
and begin to
Ou
access
seja,
more the
tendo
higher level, the
ações refletidas,
neocortex.
como as dona
And
Júlia,
so, as we
elas
have
vão
actions that are
através
reflected upon,
especificamente desse
they are
neocórtex.
proactive, they
E
come
a
from that
repetição do
neocortex.
comportamento,
So, the
pode
repetition of
perfeitamente,
behavior
né, nos trazer
can very
consequências
well
bastante
bring
piores
consequences
do
that
que
can be
antes.
very
Por
detrimental to
quê?
our
Ou
evolutionary
seja,
process.
é esse homem ainda
Why?
belicoso, esse
Because
homem
we're
do
still this
passado, que
aggressive person
simplesmente
from the
não
past
sai deste lugar.
that
Então é
cannot
muito
move from this
confortável
spot.
ficar
It's
ficamos
very
ali.
comfortable for us to
Então
stay in that
é uma
area.
existência qual
But if you stop to
qual
think
é
about it,
a utilidade dela
what is the
se ela
utility of
fazer a
this
mesma
life
coisa,
if
né?
it is for us to
Então,
do the same thing as
estamos aqui
before?
para fazer algo diferente,
So we're here
tá?
to do something
Fazer
different,
algo novo.
to
A
do something new.
uma gama de possibilidades, como nos diz
There
o
is a
nosso
range of
mestre, né?
possibilities,
Nós
as
temos essa
Joanna the
oportunidade de
Angelist
viver uma
tells us.
vida
And so if we have these opportunities, then we should not squander them.
funeral e
It is so
você
sad to go to a
olha a
funeral
trajetória daquela pessoa e
and
você
we
vê
see
que a
the life of that
pessoa
person
passou a
and
vida
see that the
inteira
person spent their
alcoolizada,
entire
né?
life
E
a
que
victim of
teve
alcohol,
uma relação familiar totalmente disfuncional,
and that they
e
had a very
muitos
dysfunctional
foram para cada
relationship,
lugar. Então, ou seja,
and that
isso
each child
acontece,
went their own way.
né?
And so, what
Mas
happened
não
in that
aconteceu com
existence?
você,
Maybe
não
it
aconteceu
wasn't an alignment
em
between
perfeição,
relationships and
né?
people. Maybe forgiveness did not take
Talvez
hold.
esse espírito tenha se comprometido mais
Maybe that
ainda.
spirit may have walked out of this life in an even worse situation than they came in.
Tem uma perguntinha para
We
Mariana
have a
depois eu
question
faço
here
para
from
você,
Marianne.
Tiago. É, a Maria Clara está perguntando se nós, como os
Maria
espíritos,
Clara is
nos
asking
encontramos
us
pelas
if it's
vibrações e
us
não
as
os
spirits also
comportamentos?
find each other through our vibrations and not just our behaviors.
Com certeza, né?
Yes, for sure.
Tá ali naquela energia, né? O
The
comportamento tá
energy
ali
is
naquela
there, the
energia, sem
behavior
dúvida.
is in that
Você vibra no
vibration.
ódio, você vibra no amor,
You have the vibration in hatred, in
com
love.
certeza a vibração tá
And so, for
ali
sure,
juntinho.
the vibration is connected to it.
Obrigado, Mariana. Passo para você, Tiago.
São umas últimas ideias para a gente pensar sobre esse encontro de hoje, no sentido
So,
de que
what are
falamos
some
sobre reencarnação,
thoughts that we can bring
conexão, né, com os processos
as we think about
inconscientes
reincarnation
vivenciados
and
ou
how we talked about the unconscious and how these experiences are
observados
found?
antes, e o esquecimento passado como uma bênção da vida.
And,
Nós
the
vamos conversar um
forgetfulness of the
pouco
past as a
aqui
blessing.
algumas ideias singelas
And here are some
sobre
simple ideas
terapêutica da alma,
as we begin to wrap up, as we think
e
about a therapy of the
acho
soul,
muito importante,
as we
como
see
falou
all of
Joana de
this.
Ângeles,
It's very important,
que
as
nós não
Joanna the Angelus tells
subestimemos
us,
os nossos
that we don't
conflitos,
underestimate our
as
conflicts,
nossas dores,
our
as nossas
pains,
tristezas,
our
porque isso que é
sadnesses,
sombrio e difícil
because that
é a
which is somber
matéria-prima
and difficult
fundamental para que a gente possa se
is a
conhecer
fundamental building
melhor.
block for us to get to know each other
Talvez a gente
and to
precise
find ways of liberating
de
ourselves.
meses, de anos,
Maybe, friends, we need months or even
talvez
years,
vidas,
maybe decades, maybe
depende do quão
lives,
profundas e
so
difíceis
that certain
envolve mais de uma
profound
pessoa, né? Envolve muitas
experiences
pessoas,
may
essas
involve more than one
experiências de
person,
fato digeridas,
that
diluídas,
they may be truly
elas podem
digested,
ser ressignificadas
diluted,
e integradas à nossa consciência.
they may be
Não sei se eu estou sendo
re-signified and
claro.
reintegrated in our conscious.
Está cortando, Tiago, a sua internet.
We are having some connection problems with
Acho
Thiago's
que
internet here.
caiu. Tiago, você consegue ouvir a gente?
Thiago, are you able to
Você
hear
congelou
us?
na tela.
Yes,
Acho
Eu tô
que
com
he's
problemas
frozen.
então,
And
tá?
so,
Se
Mariani,
pegar, eu saio.
well, I'm
Vamos
gonna jump in
adiante.
then. I'm gonna invade Thiago's
Então,
space,
assim, gente, dando continuidade a isso que o Thiago estava falando, o quanto é
just
importante a gente
going
aproveitar as oportunidades
forward. It's how important it is for us to make
que estamos
use of
estudando,
our
para
opportunities. The
viver
very fact that we are searching, that we're
esse
studying
caminho
a
de
different way,
possibilidades de aprendizado,
different
da
possibilities,
gente poder estar olhando para a gente sem crítica, né? A Joana
that we
diz
be able to look at
que,
ourselves without criticism.
que o ser integral, ele não se
Joanna tells us
pune,
that an integral
mas
being
ele se
does not blames
autocrítica,
themselves,
né? Essa maturidade e se
but they are
responsabiliza, né?
mature and they take responsibility
Então,
for their
nosso
own
querido Divaldo
change.
agora volta para a espiritualidade,
Our dear
mas no
Divaldo
nosso
returns to
filme
the
ele
spiritual realm,
serve de lembrar. A
but
gente
in his
sabe que a
film,
Joana
if you watched it, you may
conversa
remember
com ele,
that
ela tem uma
Joanna
intimidade, ela carregou
arrives
aquele
and
espírito
talks to him
que era
in that
avô
place
daquele que um dia
where he
reencarnou na
is
Terra,
talking
tá?
to the
E aí
mother
ele
of
diz
a reincarnating spirit,
Divaldo,
who is the
qual
mother of
é
a
a
spirit that
mudança
hates him.
passada?
And
Você
she
já
says, at the
teve
end of
todas
this
as
life,
mudanças,
he,
todas as
you see
situações,
that all the
todos
circumstances
os
and all the situations that happen around you, nothing was about you and others. It was all about you and yourself.
Então, olha que coisa linda, né? E ele
And look at
chegando
that
de volta para
beautiful
casa e a gente poder,
thing
né,
that as he returns
olhar
home,
essa perspectiva que a Joana nos coloca,
how we can see
é
this
que a gente
perspective that
sempre
Joanna
nunca é o
brings to
outro,
us.
gente. Sempre somos
It's
nós.
never the
As
other one, it's always
respostas para,
us.
né, para as nossas questões, para os nossos
The
conflitos,
answers of our
sempre estão no
questions and our
outro, né?
conflicts are never in the other, it's always
O outro pode
us.
até ser
The
agressivo,
other
mas
can
o que
even
que
be
a gente faz
aggressive towards us.
com a agressividade do outro?
But what do we
Preciso
do with the
explicar?
aggression of others?
Preciso
Do I
ter
need
mais
to avenge
empatia?
myself? Do I need to be more
Não,
aggressive than
eu
they are?
posso fazer uma escolha
No.
diferente.
I
Eu
can make a
posso
different
lidar com
choice.
isso com maturidade,
I can
entendendo
deal with
que
that
talvez
with
a animosidade do
maturity
outro
and understanding
seja
that
um
the
estado
animosity of others,
psicológico dele para
it's a
aquele momento.
psychological
E
state for
aí eu
them
vou fazer as minhas
for that
escolhas
period of
pelo que eu
time.
faço
And
aqui
I
e
can make the
agora.
best
Ninguém faz nada
choices.
conosco sem que a gente
That
permita.
people don't do
Somos
anything to
nós
us
os
without us
responsáveis pelas
allowing
escolhas da
us.
nossa
We
vida, pelas nossas
are the ones
decisões.
who are
Então
responsible for
nós
our
ficamos
choices and
aí
for our
nessa
lives.
condição de vítima e
And
é
so
esse
we
o
need to
momento que
leave
a
this
gente precisa
victim condition. And I
trabalhar,
think that's what
coloca
Spiritism
nesse
invites
lugar,
us to.
né, aonde
And
nós
it places
colocamos
in
que
a
somos
in a place
seres
where
responsáveis pelas
we are
nossas
responsible
escolhas
for
e
our
não as
evolutionary
vítimas,
process and not
né, dessas
victims
circunstâncias da
of these
reencarnação. Vou
circumstances
parar
that
de passar a
reincarnation
palavra
brings
para o
us.
Tiago.
I'm going to
Tiago
stop
estava
here. I'm
aqui
going to
só
send it back to
dando,
Tiago. Tiago, I was
fazendo,
just here,
fazendo um enrolation
as some
aqui
people
na
say,
fala.
just as,
Nós
taking the
enrolation.
time while you were
Eu só vou,
back.
Oi.
eu só vou falar para vocês,
I'm just going to
para
share
vocês
with you
fazerem
guys
os
Sim,
remarks,
exatamente.
né, finais.
your final remarks so that we can
Tá
wrap the
bom.
session up.
É só agradecer a oportunidade de
So we
estar
just want to
aqui
be
online.
grateful for the
A
opportunity to
gravação
be
da primeira e
here.
segunda parou, mas quando nós
But
tentamos avançar
when we
em
try
virtudes
to
que às vezes é difícil para nós
advance
termos,
and develop these
já é um
virtues that we want
esforço,
to live,
já é um esforço
that's already an effort.
Então,
So
nós temos uma dimensão virtuosa de que nos pede,
we
né?
have a
Eu lembro
virtuous
que é
side of
importante
us
perdoar.
and say, I read that it's important to
Mas
forgive.
você não pode forçar a si próprio
But
perdoar,
it's not about
porque
forcing you to
o
forgive. Why?
perdoar envolve uma
Because
dimensão de
forgiving
sentimento e
requires a
afeto.
dimension of
Então,
feeling and
assim como você
affection.
não pode obrigar alguém a amar a você, você
Much the
também não
same
pode
way
amar.
that you can't force
Fabrício,
somebody to
você tem
love
que me
somebody
amar,
else.
você não ama eu, não.
Fabrizio, you need to love me
Não
because you're my
pode
friend.
ser.
It
Então, é
doesn't
uma
make sense.
descoberta de vida, uma
This
descoberta
is a
do amor,
discovery
assim como
process,
o processo de perdão.
much the
Então,
same
se nós
way
não
we have that of
somos capazes de
forgiveness.
oferecer um perdão
So if you're not
diante
capable
dessas
offering
questões que
forgiveness
envolvem
before
almas,
these
indivíduos,
questions that
indivíduos
have to
que
do with
redeemam a si
souls,
próprias,
as we redeem ourselves, we need
então que a
time.
gente se respeite no tempo,
So may we
que possa
respect
fazer
ourselves in
parte,
time,
que a gente possa fazer
but may we
parte
also not
muito
lose
mais de
time
nós mesmos. Então,
and be able to do more
que a
for ourselves.
gente continue semeando nossas ações,
So may we
porque se nós
continue
semearmos
to
amigos, terá
sow,
colheita,
because whatever it is that we sow
devemos
is what we
plantar
will reap, whether it
se
is
as
sweet or
flores
bitter,
são sombrias ou
whether the
luminosas,
flowers
vão
are
ter as
dark or
respostas
luminous. It
suficientes
has to do
e
with
quando o poder
how I
crístico
see
dessa
life and how I
semente
offer my life in a relationship to
envolver,
others.
nós podemos mais. E a ética espírita é um convite à
And
vida.
the Spiritist
Não temos
ethics
medo
is an
de
invitation to
viver e
life.
amar são atos de
May we not
coragem,
have the fear
facilidade
to
e amor.
love
Mariane,
and do more
finalizo.
for ourselves. And Mariani, I hand it over to you.
Olha, eu só tenho a agradecer. Nem tinha visto que o tempo tinha passado. Tá tão gostoso
See,
demais.
I'm so thankful.
E vamos dar
It's
mais
such a lovely
palestras.
time together,
Mas, gente,
especially talking
eu
about
quero
these topics.
deixar realmente
But
aqui
what is it that I
uma frase
would
da
love to
Joana,
leave
né?
behind?
Aquele que ajuda a
That
enxugar
sentence from
lágrimas é
Joanna
aquele que
is
tem
probably the
tempo
best
para
one.
chorar.
Those who
A
help
gente não
to
vai ter
dry
sempre,
tears
mas às
don't
vezes
have
a
a lot
gente
of
está
times to
tão
cry
preso ao nosso
themselves.
próprio sofrimento que a gente
Sometimes we're so
acaba
attached to our own suffering
potencializando muito a nossa dor.
that we
Temos
end
que
up
cuidar da
potentializing,
daquilo que a gente sente,
potentiating our pain.
independente
We
do
have to
que está
acknowledge that which we
acontecendo
feel,
no
but we must
trabalho
also
voluntário
address
ou
it
na
through
vida
volunteer
mesmo. Às
work
vezes
and
é
learn to
muito
look unto
forte
others because sometimes their
e a
pain
gente
is
não
a
pode
lot larger than ours.
desvalorizar
And when we
aquilo
do
que
this
faz o
movement,
bem
we
e
step
não
out of
aquilo que o
ourselves
faz.
because goodness, it does good to those who do it.
Né? A gente não
When we
pode
do
perder esse
good,
momento
we feel good. It is important for us to mention that because it brings us a lot of peace. And this reality will begin to change. So it was a pleasure to be with you. And happiness really is a word that Joanna uses to be joyful, to be helpful, to be able to contribute somehow, so that these concepts may be expressed and disseminated. So I only have to say thank you, my friend Tiago, for partnering with me today, by Fabricio and everybody who's watching us today. Thank you very much.
Então, thank you very much, Mariana, Tiago, Dan, for this study. I invite everyone to our next talk, Passions and Emotions in the Psych Dynamics. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for being part of this study group, and I hope to see you all next month. Bye for now.